Good evening and welcome to tonight's webinar. Tonight we'll be talking about storytelling and why it matters. Joining us to talk about this is Nathaniel Yellis and Tim Snyder. Tonight you will be able to ask your questions by emailing live@leadershipinstitute.org or tweeting at us by using our handle @leadershipinst. You can also use the hashtag LIWebinar. With that, let's get right into tonight's event with our guests. Thank you for joining us, guys.
Excellent. It's great to be here.
Great. So, what is this whole storytelling thing?
Storytelling is a topic that I'm really excited about because it's something that conservatives can use to win. There's a lot of negative press about the conservative movement and how it's less popular. Stories, the telling of them, the hearing of them, it's one of the most valuable tools that we have. And that's why I'm excited that my colleague Tim Snyder is here. Tim is a longtime debate coach. He's coached moot court. He presents as part of his job every day to CEOs of major corporations. He knows the power of storytelling. So I'm really glad to be able to talk about storytelling with Tim and you tonight. I'd really encourage you to ask your questions by emailing the email address live@Leadership Institute or using the hashtag on Twitter, LIWebinar. We want to be able to talk to you about this important topic. So, Tim, storytelling.
Storytelling to me, I'll be honest, my introduction to political storytelling began with a trial by fire just out of college. And before I jump into that, I'm really excited to be able to discuss this topic with everyone. I know we have exciting videos coming down the pike. I'm going to talk about 10 characteristics of what an effective storyteller does, so characteristics of the teller and the effect that it has on the listener. So I think there's going to be a lot of value there. But yeah, remember, like it was yesterday, a much younger version of myself, just out of college. I was volunteering with my sister in Honduras, and I graduated in government, had a lot of experience doing communication, so I thought, press aid, political campaign makes a lot of sense. Reached out to a friend. Next thing you know, I'm in Southern California. Initial job as a press aide, and get there, start learning the ropes of what it means to do press for a national congressional campaign. Within 2 weeks, there's major changes in the campaign strategy. Our communications director is now the campaign manager. There's an opening in the press secretary position, and they say, Tim, you're running point on press. So I said, oh, okay, great. I mean, I'm smart young guy. Let's do this. And fortunately, there's someone there to mentor me along the way. But I began assembling press lists, working on strategic storytelling, and fortunately, our candidate had a great story to tell. From welfare mom to business owner to political activist to now running her own nonprofit. And so we were able to leverage that story to raise millions of dollars for her congressional campaign. So on the one hand, storytelling, big win for Tim and campaign. Unfortunately, when it came to telling her story to the audience that mattered, the voters, it was more tricky. And so we kind of had two competing narratives. We had the from welfare mom to small business owner to now I want to help bring renewal to cities, to the opposition who's casting a narrative of political outsider, coming in, you don't know her, you don't trust her, and we found ourselves engaged in in a really heated campaign. Lots of lessons learned, and from there I really became intrigued and interested in looking at how communication most effectively intersects with politics, and so that's what brings me to the table.
That's a fantastic story. Some of the emails that Tim sent when he was on that campaign still entertain me to this day of, what did I just get myself into? Does anyone have any contacts in the radio industry in Southern California? What am I doing here? Fantastic work from Tim. I'm glad he's here to talk with us about this issue. Storytelling for me is about a time that I went through about 25 slides in 10 minutes talking to a group of interns that I was training. My boss wanted me to teach them how to effectively manage people. So I got my book, 1 Minute Manager. I read it. I put together what I thought was a good PowerPoint presentation. And I went through it in about 10 minutes, 25 slides in 10 minutes. Afterwards, my boss pulled me aside and said, Nathaniel, if you do that again, you're never speaking again for this organization. And I went back to the drawing board and I was like, this is a good book. 1 Minute Manager is a fantastic book on management for training these interns. What went wrong? And I realized that What went wrong was I had nothing on which to hang these important facts. There was no structure there. So I thought about my history, and I had been a summer camp counselor. So I went back the next day and delivered the exact same content, but framed it around stories from the times that I led groups of 10-year-olds on mountain hikes in upstate New York. And all of the interns were taking notes. They all kept track of what I was talking about. They remembered the big concepts. The exact same content from the 25-slide fiasco, but because I was telling it through stories, they actually remembered it. That was one of the clues to me that storytelling was vital. What we're going to talk about tonight is why storytelling matters. Tim and I have a bunch of personal experience. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about experience in business. We're going to make some political and activism applications for you on why storytelling matters. We intend this to be a dialogue, so please, again, ask us your questions. Use the hashtag LIWebinar, email live@leadershipinstitute.org. And with that, Tim's going to jump us in to why stories.
So for me, the bottom line is stories win. At the end of the day, my day-to-day is telling stories to business leaders. So that's my primary bread and butter. But I remember firsthand learning this years ago as I was first introduced to public debate. And as Yellis alluded to, I've kind of had a borderline unhealthy degree of involvement in debate activities. Everything from political policy analysis to value debates to mock trial to moot court to model United Nations. And I remember, at least initially, my debate partners was my brother Tom, and then later my best friend Nathan. And we prided ourselves in reason, logic, as we address some of the big policy issues of the day, immigration, before Obamacare, healthcare reform, and we did moderately well. But we found ourselves inconsistently losing to teams that didn't have a solid grasp of the facts, but they had excellent presentation. They had excellent stories. They were really good with the fluff material. And unfortunately, as hard-headed as we were, hopefully are no longer, we continued the same strategy with mediocre success. And then finally, one day, we decided we've just got to change our approach. And so we kept a factual approach, but we kind of teed off it a little bit and began to form our narratives around stories to bring the power of the data in a way that the people receiving it could receive. And it was night and day, from mediocre wins to straight tournament wins without dropping a ballot, to going on in collegiate debate to be named All-American, and I assign all of that to storytelling.
Absolutely. The switching from facts only to what Tim described as fluff is a critical transition when you're trying to win arguments and build a winning narrative, pull people from the fence to your side, get people from inaction to action. It's less about what they know, and it's more about an emotional commitment to do something about it, and that's what stories get you. One of the times that I was training some entrepreneurs on raising money from venture capitalists, they had this really brilliant concept on giving better travel recommendations to people that are spending a lot of money every year on travel. It's the kind of thing venture capitalists honestly should have been really interested in. But their pitch wasn't convincing. The first question asked would be, what does your business do exactly? After running through like a 20-minute presentation on the business. It wasn't working. And it's because they were talking about markets, they were talking about the user, the customer. They were telling a lot of facts, and it was kind of interesting, but there was nothing that anyone could sink their teeth into. So they went from talking in vague business terms to presenting the story of Trevor. Trevor was a person that spent something like 10 grand a year traveling. He'd been to Peru, he'd been to Machu Picchu, but he wanted to go back to Peru and go to someplace else. And if he looked on the internet for travel recommendations for Peru, they'd send him to Machu Picchu. He'd already been there. How's he going to spend his travel budget going back to Peru? Where's he going to go? Their website answered that problem. Using that quick story of Trevor and explaining how it worked, venture capitalists went from saying, what's your business do exactly? To, your business is awesome. How do we get this thing going? Which is exactly where the entrepreneurs needed them to be. The difference, the story of Trevor. Stories win. I think the second reason why stories, you need to use stories is because they're actually memorable. And Tim has some great research and analysis on why stories are memorable.
Lest you think that all Nathaniel and I are doing is telling you stories, the data backs it up. 22% more likely to be remembered than a string of facts or a series of bullet points. And there's a lot of different
Correction,
statistics
that's
on
22 times more likely
22
to be
times.
remembered,
Thank
not
you.
22% more. We're talking radical difference here.
22 times more likely. And a story, I don't know if everyone here has read Made to Stick by Chip and Dan Heath. Phenomenal book. I would highly recommend it, Made to Stick, if you're interested in exploring the idea of how do you take an idea and make it stick with an audience. But they, in the book, they talk about an experiment they conducted on Stanford students. So, they got a large group of students, and they said, your topic is crime rates in America. I want you to divide you into two groups. I want you to give a presentation on crime rates. And so, the two groups gave the presentations to the other groups, and it was a minute long. In that minute, the average number of statistics used was 2.5. So each student 2.5 times referenced some kind of a statistic. Only one
So
student.
that's like every 20 seconds or something on average
Right.
for a statistic being used by those students. It's a lot of numbers.
And interestingly enough, can you guess how many students told a story?
I would say a third, half, something like that.
Even less. 1 out of every 10 students told a story. So they had no idea what was going on. Afterwards, the authors of the book, show them a movie clip to take their minds off what happened, then test them on their ability to recall facts. Interestingly enough, only 5% could remember a single statistic. 65% could recall the story. So really the facts back up this idea that storytelling is the way to both be memorable and to effectively make your idea stick in a marketplace.
That's really kind of incredible because you have these Stanford students, they're really sharp folks, and their first impulse is to drop facts, statistics, numbers into a 1-minute convincing speech. Only 1 in 10 use a story, and then stories are literally the only thing other smart people, other Stanford students remember. Probably a sign of my poor memory is that I've read Made to Stick several times and didn't recall the stats there. But it's incredible that they're choosing to use numbers and facts instead of stories when even they respond better to the stories. That's pretty crazy. But I think that's a business example, and it's nice. Made to Stick is a great book, and I recommend it. But how does this fit into politics, would you say, Tim?
I mean, for me, you look at both the political media marketplace and the state of discourse in American politics, it's clear that effective storytelling is the key to the future. So whatever our future holds is going to be held by the best storytellers. One thing I see day in and day out in business is that the marketplace is becoming more and more crowded. So you have, the information age gave us the internet, it gave us, a lot of things, and so people are getting inundated with facts and data.
Yeah, there's a ton of noise out there. Your inbox is full, your TV is full, your Twitter stream is full, and it's like half the time it's not even real people. It's like an organization or a non-real company sending you this stuff. Incredibly saturated.
And you're living this day in and day out.
I'm responsible for some of it as part of my job. Sorry.
So the bottom line here is, what do you do when you have an idea that you think is important, but it doesn't seem to be heard by the rest of the world? And the answer is clearly stories. But beyond that, there's a lot of really interesting facts and studies about polarization in U.S. politics. And I know Pew came out with a study recently entitled Polarization. Just Google Pew polarization, and you'll come up with the facts on this data, which is essentially saying that more and more folks are being distributed to the ends of the political spectrum. I know it's a bit controversial. There's a statistician Fiorina who says that it's not polarization, it's really placement. Folks are just assigning themselves. But the bottom line is the same. Whether it's polarization, whether it's folks assigning themselves to one end or the other, the discourse is becoming more and more divided. So how do you reach people on the other end of the spectrum?
Yeah, we're talking to ourselves, either shouting to the right or shouting like from the right to the middle, but no one's actually like pulling other people to your side. I think that's definitely the case. And the key for effective politics and activism is, you certainly have to have your base all riled up and excited, but you absolutely need to pull the people that are in the middle or tuned out or don't care onto your side if you're going to win. And by win, I mean win in a campaign sense, win in a activism sense, getting your congressman to vote for or against something, win in a local sense, getting the citizens of your community to approve or not approve the school budget. You got to be talking to more than just your little bucket of conservatives. You have to be reaching out. And you think the way to do that is stories?
I mean, it has to be, because if you look at the crowded marketplace, you realize that words are becoming cheaper.
Mm-hmm.
And so as you're using words that you think are very valuable, your listener doesn't feel the value that you feel.
Right.
How do you make them feel that?
Yeah, stories are the emotive connection for sure.
So one of the major things that the media talks about all the time is Republicans don't have or conservative candidates don't always talk about the emotional side of things. Mm-hmm. So you're saying that you think stories are the way to bring that emotion into the conversation for conservative candidates?
Yeah, I think it's a twofold approach. They have to tell stories, but they have to tell them well.
Right.
Not tell them two-dimensionally.
Right. Okay.
Absolutely. I think the media narrative likes to throw conservatives into a losing bucket in a sense, right? But it's certainly true that winning candidates have a narrative, a story that people can latch onto. I think of explaining the rise of Barack Obama from a state senator to president of the United States. You better believe his best-selling books are a cause for that. And his best-selling books weren't necessarily political treatises, although they have baked in political assumptions and policy solutions. Those books are stories about his life, who he is. If you want to know who he is, read the books, or even just the impression of a man from a troubled background who wrote books and became a U.S. senator. That's a narrative that you can latch onto. And comparing that narrative to the narrative of either John McCain or Mitt Romney, it's tough to look at just the story on the story that an average voter would know and say that Barack Obama's isn't better. I like the story of a guy parented by a single mom becoming
Seems
president.
like people like the story of an underdog more.
Absolutely, absolutely, and not to say that the Romney or McCain campaigns didn't tell stories, but certainly Barack Obama's was more universal, more believed, and ultimately more convincing as the elections show. I like elections like that. There's like a clear winner and loser, so whatever point you make, you can be like, well, Barack Obama won, he did it better, right?
Backs up your point.
Yeah, and so just to land the plane on why stories, if you want to win, you have to tell stories, whether it's to connect emotionally, to be remembered, to reach out from your little camp into someone else. You've got to be able to do that, and stories are the way to do that.
Quick question from one of our viewers. What if I don't have a real story? Is it okay to make one up or create one from various people I have met that tell a full story?
Is that question really, is it okay to lie? Is it okay to make up stories, Tim?
Well, I would say it doesn't always have to be about yourself.
That's a fair point. Like, you can tell a story about something that you've seen.
Right.
I think of a totally manufactured story, it's on my list to talk about later, but the Obama White House came up with Julia. Do you remember this thing? It was like a 20-year
yes.
college student who would go into her career, who would have a family. All these things happened to her. A lot of facts that were spin, essentially, non-real, were baked into that, but they connected them all to this Julia person. They built a nice creative timeline. They were able to reference her in a bunch of speeches and stuff. So that's a manufactured story that got the job done in terms of all of the things the Obama White House was doing for your middle-class person. So there's a manufactured story, but notice it wasn't like a fake resume or something like that.
Right.
Right.
Don't make up things. Tell other people's story, but
Yeah, and it's a parable in a sense, right? Yeah.
And you can note the risk involved with manufacturing or playing too loose with your stories. Look at the current Texas gubernatorial race. A lot of media around that. The facts of the story. How accurate are they?
Oh yeah. You've got that Democrat candidate for governor who sort of manufactured some things about her background to make it seem like an up from the ashes story, when in reality, that may not have been the case. The media likes nothing more than to destroy someone. So, if you're the kind of person, or your effort is the kind of effort that would be dissected by the media, like, don't leave a huge, open spot for them to sink their teeth into and destroy you. It's probably fair. Probably fair advice. What we want to jump into now is to talk about, we talked about why stories, because they help you win. Now we want to dig in a little bit more, and we're not yet getting to how to tell stories. That's our topic for the second webinar coming up in 2 weeks. What we're going to talk about for the next little bit is the characteristics of effective stories. In a sense, why stories may help you win. And Tim has the first one. This is a top 10. It's a list of 10. So we're going to get these 10 characteristics posted on the internet, on the Leadership Institute website for your enjoyment. But Tim's going to hit the first characteristic of an effective story.
And our goal is to make a BuzzFeed 10 of 10, right?
Oh yeah, we're going to post it to BuzzFeed. That's right. Yeah, with a GIF.
With a GIF associated. So the number one character or characteristic is the ability to connect with the experiences and or values of your target audience. So we can connect with the experience and or values of your target audience. And interestingly, I was really excited by the topic. I work for a human intelligence company, and we have great marketing.
What is a human intelligence company, Tim?
It takes a long time to explain, but it's basically connecting human data to big data to human gray matter in busises. So we work for a lot of Fortune 50, Fortune 500.
You gotta watch the jargon with this guy. Human intelligence, scary.
But we have a fantastic marketing manager.
Yeah.
Who does a really good job getting out there, connecting stories to data and stories. And so I said, hey, I'm doing this talk on effective storytelling. Is there any story that just jumps out to you? It doesn't have to be commercial. It could be anything really. A story that jumps out to you that just really connected with you, without skipping a beat. He says, I'm from Michigan. In 2011, there was this commercial. I was like, all right, well, set the stage for me. He's like, well, think about it. Height of the economic recession. I'm a native of the state. Our state is getting beat up. I know people from Detroit who are really suffering. And then you sit down, grab a bag of popcorn, turn on your TV, and this commercial comes on.
I got a question for you. What does this city know about luxury? Huh? What does a town that's been to hell and back know about the finer things in life? Well, I'll tell you. More than most. You see, it's the hottest fires that make the hardest steel. Add hard work and conviction, and the know-how that runs generations deep in every last one of us. That's who we are. That's our story. Now, it's probably not the one you've been reading in papers, the one being written by folks who've never even been here and don't know what we're capable of. Because when it comes to luxury, it's as much about where it's from as who it's for. Now, we're from America, but this isn't New York City, or the Windy City, or Sin City, and we're certainly no one's Emerald City.
This is the Motor City, and this is what we do.
The right story, the right time
Yeah.
can move people.
That's just a stunning video. I think it left everyone at that Super Bowl just with their jaws on the floor like, what is Chrysler doing? So, great storytelling.
I just want to quickly go back to a point you made. You mentioned something about, don't tell stories two-dimensionally. Can you just expand about that? Like, what do you mean by that?
Sure. So I think the crux of the question is the best storytellers are people that are students of human nature. They understand that every person walking around is a story. And so I think a lot of times mistakes, particularly in political marketing, is folks create kind of a phantom of the audience they're trying to target, and then they create these messages that are very caricatured, rather than appreciating the full human experience that their target audience has. Do you have any thoughts on that, Nathaniel?
So in my mind, a two-dimensional story is probably, even though I referenced it as a good thing, to some extent that Julia story that the White House told wasn't all that great. It assumed that the primary need of a working 20-something woman was insurance coverage for birth control, which, if you're a Democrat, is probably the most important thing. But I mean, I talked to a lot of folks, and just knowing from human experience, that's not the most important emotional need for a 20-something working person. I mean, maybe health insurance is on the list, but there are a lot of other deeper things. And so, in a sense, you're digging your own grave there, because the White House is digging their own grave with the Julia story, because it's pretty easy to come back to that and say, actually, no, that's not what people care about. People care about friends, they care about God, they care about nice vacations to go on. There are a ton of needs higher on the emotional spectrum than, health insurance coverage for birth control.
And along those same lines, understanding your audience means appreciating differences in your audience, cultural, experiential differences. I know I have previously taught debate seminars to students in Singapore. Singaporean students, trying to teach them how to more effectively speak and engage. I remember on one particular occasion, I was, for illustrative purposes, saying, there's this tension between government power, national security, and individual freedom and individual liberty. And it was just this kind of dazed, confused expression on everyone's face. And I said, there's this tension, right? You could hear a stone drop. And I said, am I missing something here? And the student said, to be honest, I don't see the tension at all. I mean, we had a big gang problem in Singapore, and the government said, okay, if we think you're part of a gang, we're going to make you disappear. And it wasn't even controversial. So then that began to prompt in me, that's really interesting. Cultural, political histories and experience impact the audience and their perception of your story.
Now, see, there's a story I want to dig into more. Tim Snyder in Singapore teaching people how to debate. Can we have a separate webinar on that? Can we do that?
Part 3.
We're gonna part 3 is going to be Tim Snyder in Singapore talking to us.
I don't think anybody wants to see that. So the second characteristic is, not only do you need to connect with the audience, but your story needs to have doesn't need to be spoken, but it needs to have a clear point or message or takeaway. So people don't need to just be moved; they need to be moved in the direction of something. There's Dove came up with this real controversial campaign, and if you Google Dove Real Beauty campaign, you'll see lots of articles on both sides of the controversy. But what no one can deny on either side of the controversy is, day after the Real Beauty campaign is launched, a YouTube video is shown. Over 1 million viewers clicked that YouTube video. I checked it a couple days ago before this webinar, and I believe the view rate was over 60 million people have clicked the video. So that story clearly connected, clearly resonated with something that real people are experiencing.
Yeah, let's roll that. Dove's Real Beauty campaign.
I'm a forensic artist. Worked for the San Jose Police Department from 1995 to 2011.
I showed up to a place I'd never been, and there was a guy with a drafting board.
We couldn't see them, they couldn't see us.
Tell me about your hair.
I didn't know what he was doing, but then I could tell after several questions that he was drawing me.
Tell me about your chin.
It kind of protrudes a little bit, especially when I smile.
Your jaw.
My mom told me I had a big jaw.
What would be your most prominent feature?
I kind of have a fat, rounder face.
The older I've gotten, the more freckles I've gotten.
I would say I have a pretty big forehead.
Once I get a sketch, I say thank you very much, and then they leave. I don't see them.
All I had been told before the sketch was to get friendly with this other woman, Chloe.
Today I'm going to ask you some questions about a person you met earlier, and I'm going to ask you some general questions about their face.
She was thin, so you could see her cheekbones. And her chin, it was a nice, thin chin.
She had nice eyes. They lit up when she spoke.
Cute nose.
She had blue eyes, very nice blue eyes.
So here we are. This is the sketch that you helped me create, and that's a sketch that somebody described of you.
So yeah, that's...
She looks closed off and fatter, sadder too. The second one looks more open, friendly, and happy.
I should be more grateful of my natural beauty. It impacts the choices and the friends that we make, the jobs we apply for, how we treat our children. It impacts everything. It couldn't be more critical to your happiness.
Do you think you're more beautiful than you say?
Yeah. Yeah.
We spend a lot of time as women analyzing and trying to fix the things that aren't quite right. And we should spend more time appreciating the things that we do like.
So the takeaway? Change the way you think about yourself.
Yeah.
I think Dove summed it up right there at the very end, what their takeaway was. It doesn't always have to be as explicit, but your message should move the audience towards your perspective, and you can do it subtly, and you can do it more obviously.
Yeah, that was a great ad. I think one of our camera girls is crying, but
I think I'm crying.
I think we all are. I mean, it's powerful emotion. We've had some great questions coming in, and I want to get to one of them right now before we sort of move forward. Linwood has said that as a conservative, they feel, a lot of times they're swimming upstream against the mainstream media and the conventional wisdom. So she asked, how important is it to be simple in the presentation and short in the timing of effectiveness?
Linwood Reagan, one of my great friends, Leadership Institute faculty. He's the executive director of Capstan, a great organization out of Alabama. But Linwood is one of my favorite storytellers. He can fill a drive from Washington, D.C. to Lynchburg, Virginia without even taking a breath. It's great. His question, though, is about the importance of being concise, especially related to when media is carrying your stories. And so concision is vital. It's one of the things that I'm going to talk about as I get into the rest of our top 10 list, but let's just put it this way. Everything you say is a chance for your opponents to attack if you're in the media spotlight. So being concise, being crisp, having a purpose behind everything you say is definitely critical. Let's get more into the top 10 list here. Stories are concrete. They force the storyteller to be really specific and really nitty-gritty is the word that kept coming to my mind. And I'm not sure quite what I mean by that. It's something that my mother used to tell me. She used to be like, get down into the nitty-gritty, because I used to be full of fluff, to one of Tim's earlier points. But it forces you to be real. Stories force you to be real. Just jumping back to the narrative, we know what the White House intended when they said Julia. Totally different than someone pulling out a chart on the House floor saying the average 20-something woman. You can't remember average 20-something woman. You can remember Julia. Being concrete, being specific, getting down into the nitty-gritty gives something really, really important to the listener, because it forces the storyteller to do something, to be specific.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think the irony there is that who more than someone in politics wants to be real to the audience who struggles the most to come across as genuine? I know
Right.
you talk to anyone across the political aisle, and what are their perceptions of
They say
political-
politicians just speak in platitudes and everyone sounds the same and everyone's lying and no one believes anything. So yeah, being concrete, being specific gets you all out of that political death trap. Something that we just encountered here in the studio is that stories bring real emotion. They bring your emotion to life for others. Dove is a multinational brand, part of a global, Globotron-sized company, right? But you watch that ad and you think that Dove has a soul and an emotion, and the way they tell their story, their view of the world, moves you to tears. That's the power that stories can bring. I think there's a great example of this, so much so that I think illegally bootlegged the video and put it on my website a few years ago. A conservative...
You're on camera.
Everything that I do on inathaniel.com is legal and supported by me. I should put a disclaimer on there. Don't take responsibility for this. Doug Wilson is a conservative theologian, college professor, pastor. He lives in outside of Moscow, Idaho. And he does something that's kind of interesting. He goes to pretty hostile audiences on university campuses and just holds open dialogue with them, taking their questions, taking their hostility, taking their heat, trying to articulate the conservative message to them. And one of the videos I watched of him doing this on a college campus was one where a little girl stood up at the microphone and said something to the effect of, my two mothers, or my moms, are both pastors of our church, and they're the most kind people that we know. And this little girl, this like 10-year-old's put on the spot as like a poster child of gay marriage, having these lesbian mothers who happen to also be ministers. And there's this really just emotional story of the way the church supports her, supports the ministers, just this whole thing about how great gay marriage is and how it evokes the best of humanity. So Wilson's standing there at the podium having this sort of question launched at him, like, why do you hate us when our life is so beautiful? And I found his response really interesting, because he didn't say, you're sinners, although frankly he believes that. He didn't say, your union shouldn't be recognized by the state, although he believes that. He didn't say, you're not actually Christians, although I think he probably believes that. He said, I see that story and I want to hold up another story for your consideration. He talked about the conservative Christian homeschool families in his congregation. He talked about the way they cared for a member of their congregation who was dying, undergoing some significant problem, the hospitality, the generosity, the love that his congregation shows. And he was specific, he was concrete, and it was actually really moving. The room went from being kind of hostile to him, waving signs, to a room that was not necessarily on his side, but at least pausing enough to consider what he had to say. I thought that was a really effective use of story to kind of give a window into someone. I mean, if you're a leftist, you don't think Doug Wilson has an emotional bone in his body. You don't. Yet him telling this story made you think of the other side, the opposition, as real people. I don't think he had a chance of moving anyone in that room to being on his side of the issue, but he did have a chance of placing a seed in their minds that maybe the opposition doesn't actually hate us. And his use of a specific story from his conservative Christian church is what did that.
You know, I'm no psychologist. I'm personally convinced that the emotions that people feel when a controversial issue like homosexuality or homeschooling, for that matter, the emotion that's hearkened comes from stories. You know, stories that person has collected over time, and the stories that they associate with those words. And so by telling a story, you can slowly change an association.
Yeah. How do you fight an emotional battle? It's not with reason and facts and analysis. You fight an emotional battle on the emotional level. Right. That's exactly right. We're jumping through this top 10 list. Stories force you to focus your points. What do I mean by focus? Well, back to Linwood's question. Stories force you to be concise. It takes longer to tell the story of Trevor, remember from our travel startup pitch. It takes longer to tell the story of Trevor than it does to describe the 90 things you should know about this particular opportunity in this particular market. But by forcing you to be concise, by forcing you to kind of leave some of what you want to say behind, you actually then have a chance to be memorable, which is, I think, what we found in that Stanford students scenario, where very few people told a story. They probably spent more of their minute speech telling a story than others did reciting fact after fact. But that's exactly what was memorable. It takes a little time to do a story right, you know? You have to have some characters. You have to have a little obstacle. People work together, do something to overcome that obstacle, right? You know, your high school English teacher can tell you the elements of a story, but they certainly take longer to tell than bullet points D through F on your, you know, endless PowerPoint slide.
It's the old adage, less is more.
Less is absolutely more. If you can replace 10 slides in your PowerPoint with one story, I think you're doing yourself and probably your audience a favor. So there's concision in a non-concise story for you. Stories force you to structure your points. There's a fun thing that comes out of the graphic design space called Pachakacha. You're like, Pachaka what? Pachakacha. It stands for like chit-chat. It's a Korean word, as I recall. But this thing is, don't laugh at
Your
me.
pronunciation was a little off. I can hear your accent coming through, so.
Singapore Tim chiming in here. Pachakacha is this thing where you have, the presenter has 20 slides. They have 20 seconds per slide. And that's it. The thing auto advances after 20 seconds, and everyone's drinking beer in a like bar, like a little conference space, and the presenter goes up, and just the slides go. They tell their thing, and then they're done. You know, however many minutes later, 20 slides, 20 seconds per slide. It's a fun way to just orient yourself to a new idea. I think of it as like a TED Talk, but with a definite ending point, so you know what you're getting.
So is it a competition? Is their version of a rap?
Oh yeah, you absolutely have to vote on who had the best Pachakacha.
That's great.
Thing. So I, of course, being me, did this at one point. I think there's a video out there of me doing this, but please don't look for it.
We're going to post that on the Leadership Institute website after the webinar.
That does not go on the leadership. Yeah. Stay tuned for webinar episode 2 in 2 weeks when I will not be here, but my Pachakacha presentation will be. So I was having trouble with putting this thing together. I knew what I wanted to say. I wanted to tell the story of how I coach people who aren't good at communicating to communicate. The audience was mostly creative folks, graphic designers, architects, photographers. The person who spoke right before me was a children's book illustrator. You ever met one of those people? This girl, Abigail, like she illustrates children's books for a living. Totally tremendous stuff. And then I came in as like, you know, this sort of like B-school guy. Like, what am I going to say? So I needed a story framework. I needed a framework. I chose to tell stories because I was like, what are people going to remember? They're going to remember characters. So instead of having 20 slides about my process, I had characters. I had Todd the engineer, computer scientist, actual real person. I had a picture, like one of my slides was a picture of Todd. Todd is one of these guys that has wrist problems because he codes so much. He has degrees from every university you can imagine. He's really, really sharp, but he has trouble, as you may be able to imagine, he's a little trouble taking his ideas and explaining them in a way that people understand why they're important. He can usually get through the what his idea is, but he has some trouble kind of getting outside of what and connecting to the people he's talking to. So by telling Todd's story, by telling the story of Stephen, one of my communications mentors, I used Stephen's picture and then I came up with I did like a hand drawing of 2 islands to use one of his analogies. But Pachakacha worked for me because I had these characters driving the narrative, and then I was, of course, like a character in the thing itself. Compare that to these 20 slides that don't work. Imagine someone going through one of those terrible PowerPoints from work every 20 seconds. Stories help you get out of that morass. You have to say less stuff because one of your slides is a picture of Todd, but in saying less stuff, you're forced to focus on the stuff that matters, and then by giving this stuff a character, by giving it a plot, by giving it resolution, by connecting your data to a story like I did in this presentation, it actually works. People actually remember what I talked about in my little Pachakacha thing. Although the children's book illustrator still beat me in the competition at the end of the night. continuing our top 10 list, I want to just zoom out for a moment. I just told a story about this weird sort of mixer thing that creative people do with 20 slides and 20 seconds per slide to illustrate a point. What were we doing? We were laughing at them. We were laughing at me. We were being entertained, right? What do you do when you want to hang out with your friends? You're not telling them about facts. You're not telling them, here are the 9 things that I did today, although, you may end up saying 9 things. What do? We tell stories. That's how people connect with each other, right? Yeah. We want to entertain each other. When you're in a circle of people talking at one of those terrible workplace mixer things, you just want to be the person that when there's a pause, you have something entertaining to say, you make people chuckle, you make people think, and then like the conversational ball can move to someone else, right?
Yeah, my friends love me. I'm hilarious.
All of Tim's friends love him. When you want to talk to your friends, you tell them a story.
That's right.
Frankly, when you want to convince your friends of something, you tell them a story, right? If we want to treat other people, our next door neighbor that we want to get to vote for our candidate, maybe the people that we're talking to at a town hall meeting or at a public forum on a piece of legislation, we should treat them like we treat our friends. We should tell a story. Now, our stories should have a point. You can go on and ramble forever. There are some constraints to this, but in terms of being a winning communicator, being a little entertainment helps. A few chuckles helps.
And ironically, thinking it goes back to that audience question, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Who is the audience? What is the emotion I'm wanting to elicit? You're not always wanting to elicit an emotional knee-jerk reaction like the Dove commercial. Sometimes, and I know Obama's campaign did a great job of this, having funny, humorous pieces of their kind of strategic communications plan that they were rolling out during the election, which allows people to experience the whole range of human emotions.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's this, it's like your people are going door to door, they're knocking on the door, they're calling on the phones, they're campaign volunteers, they're down in the dumps. What do? You release a hilarious video of Mitt Romney and Paul Ryan being total jokers, right? And that, you may not be winning over any independents, but you get your base excited, laughing, and they're inspired to go out and do more, right?
Yep,
That's great stuff.
On the topic of jokes, one of our people that just one of our listeners that emailed us in asked, "How true is this statement?" And he quotes from something. "What's the most powerful form of storytelling? ? Jokes." How true would you say that statement is?
The most powerful form of storytelling, jokes. I gotta kind of get behind that statement, right? Why do we pay money to go hear people talk to us at comedy clubs, or why do we watch Comedy Central? It's because these people are incredible storytellers, and we happen to feel good about ourselves through laughter at the end of it, right?
Yeah, I really want to get behind the statement, but I disagree with that.
Webinar fight.
Apology to the listener. And I don't have hard data to back me up, but we could do a research off or something and do one of those 20 slides on what we think.
You work in human intelligence. I don't want to have a research off with you.
But obviously it depends on what your end is. And I think it's what people sympathize with, and I think a lot of people sympathize with tragedy, hard times, and everybody wants to laugh, and so absolutely jokes are an important part of the arsenal of communication, but it's got to be a mixture.
You want to use the full range of emotion. You don't really take a comedian seriously because he's always trying to be funny. You may not. The umpteenth time someone appeals to your pity to offer a donation to an organization, your pity may have run out. You may need another emotion, right? So I think there's certainly a balance there.
Before we move on to the next one, another question just came in, and it's a question just for Tim, so you can just, wait to the side here.
That scares me. Can I have a phone a friend in case I have a hard time with the question?
I can't help you on this one. That's the rule.
So the question is, how critical do you think it is to have the right voice in political campaigns to tell a successful and captivating story?
The right voice?
Yeah, the right voice in political campaigns to tell a successful and captivating story.
So I guess I'm a little bit unclear on what they mean by voice, but I do think the vehicle of the message is critically important because people associate the story with the messenger. And so whatever those associations are, you have to think about what is the message I'm trying to communicate, and is the vehicle that I'm using to communicate that message the correct one. It may be a bad example, but if you're a conservative Republican trying to communicate about gender equality and your care for your care for that issue, it may be smart of you to think about the vehicle of who the voice is that's going to be communicating your concern and your care. And I think a lot of times there's been a lot of high-profile missteps and misconsiderations for the voice of the message.
I think that's absolutely true. You need to have the right person.
Awesome.
We are running out of time on this top 10 list, and the last 3 are really exciting to me, but we're going to have to save them for the website. So tune in to leadershipinstitute.org if you want to know about razor blades, if you want to know about Jared from Subway, and if you want to know Nathaniel's theory of Barack Obama. Because those are the 3 that we're going to leave on the cutting room floor for this webinar. But go to leadershipinstitute.org and search for this top 10 list, and we'll have it there for you. With that, I want to jump to this item, Tim. This story, and the reason that I'm jumping to this, kind of making a little audible here, going off script, is because if you want one Tim Snyder story, I think this is the Tim Snyder story. So we're out of top 10 list. We're into kind of the second to last little element here, characteristics of effective storytellers. Tim is an effective storyteller, and this one's a really awesome one.
Well, unfortunately, this story gets to give you both ends of the spectrum. So you get to see Tim as an effective storyteller and Tim as a rather ineffective storyteller. And so I started this new job. It was brand new, exciting, working for this human intelligence company, doing data analytics, and I was their head analyst, managing a small team of analysts. And essentially, we look at corporate data, and we would go give these presentations to executives of monolithic companies because they're matrixed, complex, they need clarity. And so there's this $11 billion company that signs up for 3 assessments. We run our apps on them, we collect all the data, and it comes time to present. So I kind of present each narrative to the buyer, and everything's hunky-dory until late on Thursday. The client reaches out to us and says, hey, can you present to a senior offsite the findings of all of the data you collected, which was hundreds of thousands of data points, mind you, and it wasn't all analyzed in one place in one presentation. So the next morning I fly out to California, and I spend the entire weekend working on harnessing all of this data for this offsite, which I have very little context for. And it's very, it's a big deal. $11 billion company. We really want to nail this one. An offsite with a room full of senior executives. So I go in there, give the presentation. It was very, very factual, very, very data driven, but without knowing the audience, without understanding who I was communicating to, without telling an effective story, but giving lots of valuable facts. At the end of the day, it was okay. And the buyer said, it was all right. To be honest, I'd give it a 5 out of 10. And when someone says a 5 out of 10, in my mind, I'm like, I'm an A/B student.
That's not good.
I'm not a 5
that's
out
no
of
good
10.
as a presenter to be like, I kind of left the glass half full after talking to the customer, right?
Right. So I go back to the office, and if someone who hasn't given a lot of presentations, you may not feel this, but anyone who has knows that a bungled presentation is the worst feeling you can feel. The good news is
there's good news at the end of the story.
The light at the end of the tunnel is they ask me back, and they say, we've got this global conference in Texas. Will you fly out and present to this management team the data? And he was like, can you make a few adjustments from the last time? I was like, yeah, I'll make a few adjustments. So, obviously stakes really high, my nerves really high. And I sit back and I think about, looking at all of the data, I need to go back to the drawing board about the basics of communication, which I somehow lost sight of. And I need to think about who are these people, what are they struggling with, and what is the story based on all of these millions of data points that's going to connect with them. I go to the presentation, start out and say, data tells stories. And then give them a simple, concise story about who they are, what their people want of them. And by not even a third into the presentation, the buyer sends an email to our company, says, Tim nailed it, he's rocking this presentation, this is exactly what we need. Same data, a story.
Add the story. Tim rocked it. From 5 out of 10 to Tim rocked it.
Remember
How about
that. Remember that last portion.
Effective storytellers, I think, do what Tim just referenced, and it's that he took a step back and thought about his audience and what they needed specifically. His audience probably was in the data every day, looking through emails, talking to people. They didn't need necessarily more data, although they got it. What they really needed was a schema, a story, something, a lens through which to view the data, if that makes sense. And I think politically, that's what really great communicators offer. They understand where their people are. They understand what needs they have, real needs, perceived needs, emotional needs. They have a good view of their followers, their political followers, and they talk to them in such a way, use stories in such a way that they move those people onto their side, move those people into activism. And it really takes, I think about a member of Congress that I actually don't really like. He's now retiring, Maine's 2nd District Representative Mike Michoud. He is diametrically opposed to what surveys say a majority of his constituents believe on the issue of abortion, on the issue of gay rights. Many issues he's opposed. But because he came up in one of their communities, he was a paper mill manager, he was a longtime state elected official prior to going to the Congress. He was one of them. And frankly, if you polled people the right way, I bet you'd find people saying, I disagree with Mike on this issue, but I'm still going to vote for him, because he's one of us. And the way he communicated, I'm one of you, wasn't facts, wasn't a voting record necessarily, because his voting record was kind of iffy for that district. The way he communicated, I'm one of you, was his paper mill stories. His I hate DC, I like being in Maine stories. Probably a lot of members of Congress hate being in DC when they're telling stories, but when it comes down to it, they actually really like it, and that's why they're terrible. But I can't say that in a 501c3 webinar. So the point is, effective storytellers reach into the audience in that way and convince them through stories that I'm one of you. And that's what it takes to win in politics. We are now down to the so what section of this webinar. You've listened to us talk. You've listened to 7 of a top 10 list. Carol's going to email you how to get in touch with that top 10 list. But you've gotten all this data, all this information. What are you going to do with it? And that's where I turn it over to Tim Snyder.
That's great. I mean, if you get nothing from this half, we're going to talk about the mechanics of telling good stories. You know, good storytelling isn't like flipping a coin. I hope I tell a good one now. There's an art behind it. If you're kind of introverted, you're not a natural entertainer, there is a way to master storytelling. So that's part 2. If you get nothing from part 1, it is that question. So what? You know, let's talk about foster care. Foster care is an important subject. Okay, there's about, you look at the numbers, I think it's around 400,000 kids in America's foster care system. About 50% of them in homes completely unrelated to their own. I think the average is something like 3 years before they get cycled into some kind of home. So you have these kids in transition, huge rippling effects on their lives, on their children's lives, on their families' lives. And I can tell you that, and it's important. I can tell you those facts. I can tell you those numbers. But guess what tells that message and moves you to act way more effectively than I ever could? A story. And there's a short film called Removed, and we're going to play just a short piece of it for you now.
Sometimes someone hurts you so bad. It stops hurting at all. Until something makes you feel again. And then it all comes back. Every word, every hurt, every moment. How could you ever understand where I come from? if you ask, even if you listen, you do not really hear or see or feel. You don't remember my story. You haven't walked my path. You haven't seen what I've seen.
First, I hope the Leadership Institute will invite me back, even though I probably depressed the entire audience with the video selection. With the video selection tonight. I really wanted to show the whole short film. It's about 12 minutes, but given time, I couldn't. So you only got a brief snapshot of it. The entire video, again, it's called Removed. I'd encourage you to Google it, and it'll pop up. Is the story of this one girl and her journey from where she is and what you saw in the film, her original family, and then her journey through the foster care system. Will very likely move you to tears. But you connect that face and that story to the statistics I told you, and suddenly you want to do something. You want to act. And that's what a story can do.
It's been fun talking today about the importance, the power of story, why storytelling matters for political purposes. Although I agree with Tim, his video selection has been really depressing, so sorry about that.
We'll have funny ones.
We're going to have more fun in 2 weeks when we come back and talk about the mechanics, how to tell a story, how to tell a story in a winning way. Maybe we can make a little fun of ourselves for stories that failed. That may be an entertaining topic. But 2 weeks we're going to talk about mechanics, how to pick up this powerful tool.
Nice. Well, thank you, Nathaniel. Thank you, Tim, for joining us today. And thank you guys for coming in today. Great questions. Thanks for sending them in. Apologize we didn't get to all of them. But like we said, they'll be back in 2 weeks, Wednesday, July 23rd, again at 6 p.m. for you to be able to ask your questions again and talk about the how. As always, this webinar was recorded and it will be available for you to view at leadershipinstitute.org/activism on demand. Also, be on the lookout for an email tomorrow from Carol Way. She will be sending you information on where you can find the top 10 that Nathaniel and Tim went through today. With that, thank you again. Have a great night. And with that, I'm out.